Hello everyone, in today's video I want to do a bit of a tournament preview about the Saudi Eleague Major that's going on right now. Now there's 4 majors for Saudi Eleague are running this year and the first one's already started. I've not seen too many people talking about it despite quite a lot of top level players, world champions, Overwatch League winners actually competing in this tournament. So I thought we'd do a bit of a tournament preview, look at the structure, look at the format, look at some of the teams involved and try and pick out some of the key dates for us to pay attention to for when some of these bigger, more exciting games are happening. So we can jump right into it here. This tournament started a little bit ago with an open qualifier from which we've taken a pool of teams that have now entered what is being known as Phase 1. So Phase 1 is a round-robin group stage where the top 2 teams are going to then skip right to the playoff bracket, which is going to be an offline event held at the SEF Arena. If you watched Saudi Eleague last year, it's got the same venue. It's a pretty nice venue, and it's always nice to see teams actually compete on LAN and Overwatch, a rarer and rarer situation teams find themselves in. Now, for the teams who aren't these top 2, they're going to go into Phase 2, where they'll do another round-robin group stage. What they'll do from here is the top 4 of those teams will then join the original 2 teams in this 6-team double elimination bracket at the end. Date-wise, Phase 1 has already started. The first games were played yesterday at time of recording. And then Phase 2 will happen on the 7th to 16th of March. Now, in terms of OWCS, because some of these teams that we'll get onto a bit later are obviously competing in both, these dates actually clash with the second week of groups in OWCS. So for teams competing in both, if you can be in these top 2 teams and avoid this big schedule clash, it's super high value for you. So we'll get onto the teams in a bit more detail later, but for those of you aware, it will be likely Twisted Minds and Rock Esports who have been these top 2 teams. So it's super important for them to win this Phase 1 so they can skip this stage and just pick up in the playoffs here. The playoffs themselves are going to happen on the 25th of March, which doesn't clash with OWCS because OWCS finishes on the 24th of March. But obviously, those of you who are a little bit more mathematically advanced will realise that's only 1 day away. So if you're in the final of OWCS or playing on that final day, you'll do that. Then the very next day, you'll be playing your first LAN game at the SEF Arena if you're one of these Saudi teams competing in both. So there's some complicated logistics for teams to try and solve here. I expect if teams do end up playing in both, they'll actually go to where they're staying for the SEF Arena early and play their OWCS games from there, and that would make the most sense. Overall, I think it's quite an interesting format. Obviously, the double group stage means there's actually quite a lot of games. So in terms of robustness, because we're all best of 5s as well and we're playing so many games, the top 6 teams we end up with should actually be the true top 6 teams. So in that sense, I think the structure's quite nice. Likewise, when we get to the map pool, what we see is actually a very small map pool compared to a lot of map pools like we'll have in OWCS or even Overwatch League. But what would often happen in Overwatch League is you'd have set maps. So in a week, this would be the maximum amount of maps you'd ever have to prepare for. So I actually quite like the tighter format because even though it means we're going to see a lot of repeat maps, we'll see maybe a lot of King's Row or a lot of Midtown or maybe loads and loads and loads of Esperanza. But for the teams, it's way easier to prepare for this type of map pool than it is for a much larger map pool, especially when we've got elimination games and you might be playing multiple games in the day and all of this. So I'm actually, in terms of format and structure, it's a little bit unique, but I quite like a couple of things they've done, and we'll see how it plays out for some of those teams. Speaking of the teams, we can talk and take a look at them. Now, we're at 10 teams now in this Phase 1 group, and the first thing to really say is that actually, the logo game's pretty on point here. Good logos. Twisted Mind one's a little bit ugly, but other than that, compared to what we're going to see in OWCS, the logo game is actually really high quality here. We've got like a cool bird, we've got a cool dragon, we've got this nice little lion with a crown. Look at this V. This V's got a city in it. Lots of really good logos, so I actually think these teams here are probably blown all the European and North American teams out of the water with their logo quality. But for those of you who aren't here for my graphic design power rankings, we'll look at some of the rosters. So the big ones to obviously talk about are Twisted Minds and Rock Esports. Now, Rock Esports is essentially GK Esports from a previous Saudi major. It's got 4 of the same players, including Overwatch League champion Checkmate. They had Landon on GK Esports, but obviously as Landon is now with We Spitfire, Iziaki has been drafted in to replace Landon and add a lot of Overwatch League experience to this Rock roster, which makes this Rock roster, I don't know if I'd say Iziaki is better than Landon. He probably on like Anna and Zen maybe. certainly not on Baptiste, but Izayaki is quite clearly a very high quality flex support, and I think it'd be really fair to say Izayaki is probably the best flex support in this tournament out of all the ones we're looking at here. So this is going to be the big story of Saudi League. This is going to be the big head-to-head. Twisted Minds have been on top for so long. Is this ROK roster finally the one who can knock them off their perch? I think in terms of talent, ROK obviously have a lot of talent. People will know Checkmate because he won the Overwatch League. He's very good. Izayaki, I think obviously people will know. A very storied career, lots of success for him as well. But people they won't know are Oi, TVNT and Rojo. Now TVNT had a super impressive Sigma in the previous tournament where he was going really head-to-head, toe-to-toe with KSA, which is no mean feat on Sigma. Rojo was somewhat eclipsed by Quartz on Sojourn, but Rojo still looked like a very competent, very talented Sojourn, so excited to see more of him, and Oi seemed pretty good on Lucio, more than good enough to sort of do his job in the comp. So this ROK roster, in terms of raw talent, they have strengths in some areas that Twisted Minds don't, while Twisted Minds obviously have in the form of Quartz and KSA, they have particular strong points as well. But what's interesting is every time Twisted Minds have submitted this type of core, they've got the big advantage that this core have played together for ages. Even Kellex has actually been with this team for ages as well. So this core of players is actually rock solid and super experienced. And all the teams we'll be playing against were mostly teams put together just to compete in these one-off tournaments. But now, ROK Esports, I don't know why I've drawn it as a boot, but ROK Esports are the real deal. They're competing in OWCS as well, which means this team is here to stay. They will be practicing consistently throughout the year for a long period of time and have a chance to maybe catch up in terms of experience and understanding with each other. And this is something that's never really happened, from what I understand, in Saudi League before, when there's a team with as much quality and will be sticking together. So maybe in this first Saudi E-League, Twisted Minds will still come out on top. But the longer the year goes on, the more time ROK Esports get as a group of players together, the stronger and stronger they'll be. So these guys are probably going to be our top two teams. They're probably going to be in the final. And it's going to be really, really interesting to see if ROK can finally be the team to slay Twisted Minds. Because a lot of the times it's not been close. We thought GK could maybe do it in the last major, which wasn't his core of players. And they got quite close. It was 4-2 in the final. Now with more time together, more experience, their Korean players coming to stay for a long period of time, not just for the tournament, maybe this could be the one. This could be the one, maybe. And it's also important to note for these two teams, because they're competing in OWCS, not messing up in this phase one so they get to skip this middle stage. It's super important for them not to drop any silly matches or anything to go wrong in that sense. We can talk about the other teams now, where I think myself and probably a lot of you will be a lot less familiar with a lot of the players. The big one that stands out is this Victory Esports team. Obviously, Kaneo was on Ex-Oblivion, and people will know Cloud as well from his time, obviously with Finland at the World Cup, and his success in Overwatch Contenders as well. So these are two pretty solid players, and they combine it alongside QLM, who was an impressive hit scan in the previous tournament, Haku, who is obviously the World Cup winner, solid Lucio, one who I expect to play a sort of second, if they need double flex support, he'll come in for that. Chaos had a good tournament last time around as well, but he didn't actually playing Anna because there was a bunch of roster problems on his previous team, playing with someone in Merit. So he actually had to play a lot of Anna, but he'll be back on tank here. So I think this team probably really stands out as one that has some of the best imports in terms of Cloud probably covers all of the weaknesses of Goku and QLM. And if I look at this kind of sort of starting roster or something and then one of these tanks, it actually looks a really solid team. And I think these guys actually have maybe third place is theirs to lose, essentially. I don't think they'll be able to get close to either of these teams. It'd be a big upset if they do. But I think it's a rock solid team. Not this rock. It's a rock solid team that will probably get third place in this. As we go down the rest of the rosters, I think what's important to note is in the open qualifiers, obviously these guys finished top of the open qualifiers. Then these 6 teams in the middle all finished 11-2. And then these other 2 teams sort of scraped in a little bit here. So the big one to look at in some ways is probably Vicious, but we'll get to that one later because that situation's a little bit more complicated than a lot of the others. In terms of the other players we're going to see in this event. I think this Red Esports team, obviously people know Dollar and maybe a few people know Lauren as well from their time in Contenders. Now, this team actually competed, Francium and Slowdive competed as Castle Black last time around, who did go out in the group stage of a previous major, but they actually nearly upset F16 Esports, which was the Someone Merit team. They nearly upset them despite the Castle Black roster had no imports on it the previous season, if I'm not mistaken. So with an old domestic roster nearly upset Someone and Merit, it's worth taking note of. And now they've upgraded with some imports. Maybe not the biggest names you're ever going to see, but I think this Red Esports team could be an interesting one to keep an eye on and could potentially overperform. The team with maybe the best other domestic talent outside these top three, I think, is actually R8 Esports. I think Speedy and Miraculous were both very impressive in the previous major. So I think with the addition of EIS and Hira, again, we've got Contenders experience coming in. And there's a chance this team is actually pretty competitive in the sort of best of the rest category outside of this top three. I think the battle between R8 and Red will be pretty close. I think, again, we look at 55 Esports with Naga and Zerion. Again, a lot of experience. A lot of what will happen for these teams where they have these sort of contenders imports like these teams here. A lot of it will come down to how good the domestic talent is to balance them out here. I think another team worth mentioning is Dragon Esports. Trust and Level 1 Crook competed at the last major as well, but didn't actually make it to the group stage, despite Trust looking quite good at Sigma during those qualifiers. So if it's the right meta for him, I can potentially see him making a big difference for his team. But I think if I had to put my money where my mouth is, I'm really thinking R8 and Red Esports potentially look like some of the stronger ones. Maybe 55 Esports to take these final three spots behind these top three. So if you want my predictions, that would be my top six if I had to guess right now. I think when we get to these two remaining teams, I think Peak Esports probably not going to make it out of groups. I don't know obviously a lot about their domestic talent, but I think in terms of if we just compare imports to imports, well, the imports are stronger on the rest of the teams. Now, we should mention Warriors Esports as well, because obviously Ange and Abik, similar thing, they've essentially gotten a contenders backline on Warrior Esports. So again, I think they don't seem as strong as some of the other imports, but a lot of this between these sort of teams here will come down to the domestic talent. How good is the domestic talent? So we'll wait and see what happens with that. But the one to really talk about is this Vicious team. Because you might be looking at this going, how has he not talked about Jimmy yet? Why has he not talked about Jimmy? Surely Jimmy's a pretty good import as far as these all go. And you'd be right, he's a good import. But there's been a few complications. What has changed between Saudi Esports last year and this year is last year, you could only field 2 import players at any one time. So if you were Twisted Minds last year, you would have had this roster, but you also would have had Hadi on it. And what would have happened is you could have had all 3 people on the roster, hypothetically, but you could only play 2 of them at any one time. So if Hadi played, you couldn't play both the backline, or if you played both the backline, then Hadi couldn't play in this hypothetical. But what they've changed is now you can't register more than 2 imports. So you can only have 2 people without citizenship on the roster, which is actually the problem Twisted Minds had, and a big part of the reason why Hadi ended up leaving this roster, because they wanted the backline as well, and obviously Hadi had options to join up with Spitfire again. So Twisted Minds were aware of this situation and made steps to accommodate it. You've got to bear in mind as well, what Twisted Minds have done since is they've actually signed Sky Ripper. So again, Twisted Minds have a situation where they have 3 players, but they can only register 2, so they've chosen to register Kellex and Slay, and Sky won't be able to compete in Saudi League, but will be able to compete in OWCS for them. Vicious haven't come to this same conclusion, so they've registered 3 foreign players in Erikek for tank, Jimmy the Hitscan, and Turkey, I think, is the 3rd player then who also qualifies. But because of the order they registered in them, Erikek and Turkey were first. So because Jimmy was 3rd, he's not been allowed to play, which you might have seen on Reddit recently about him not being allowed to play in these first matches. Now, this is obviously a huge blow for Vicious, and if we're just talking about who's going to get out of groups, it probably ruins Vicious's chance of getting out of groups, right? They've lost their big star player, they've lost their big import, and it obviously sucks for Jimmy to have this taken away from him last minute, because there's not a lot of opportunities for Chinese players to compete in Overwatch right now. So it is a big shame for Jimmy. But I think I would say Twisted Minds were aware of this situation from the start. So if Twisted Minds were aware of it, I feel like there's no reason Vicious as an organization shouldn't also have been aware of it. So I think Jimmy is probably the person who's, whatever way you break it down, he's probably been screwed and he's only found out recently. But I think as an org, the rule change was clear from the beginning and all the other orgs have met these criteria. Twisted Minds have even actively changed their roster with that in mind as well. So I really think maybe there is some blame towards the tournament organizer, but there's probably a decent amount of blame to go towards Vicious as well. Obviously, feelings go out for Jimmy because he's been screwed out of playing, and it does suck for the player. But I think ultimately, if you take Jimmy out of this, it probably ruins this team's chance of getting out of groups. So it sucks for Jimmy. But yeah, lots of questions towards the org for me on that one in terms of why they weren't aware of this. So as the group stage has already started, we can take a look at the early results. There's nothing too mind-boggling here. Vicious have lost their first game without Jimmy, but Twisted Minds Rock go into the top. Everything seems pretty much as you'd expect. The big one to watch for in this group stage is this game here, obviously, the Twisted Minds versus Rock. A little bit of a preview of a game we might get in OWCS. A little bit of a preview of who will come out as the king of Saudi Arabia. So this game is on the 26th of February, 5:30 GMT. I don't know how accurate these times are at this stage, but let's presume they're fair. So 26th of February, which is quite soon. From what I understand, unfortunately, though, none of these games are going to be streamed. So this game's actually super interesting, not just in terms of the Saudi E-League power rankings, but also the European OWCS power rankings. So it would be super interesting if we could see this game in some form. I'll talk to the teams and see if there's something we can arrange with replay codes, but I can't make any promises. I've not sorted anything yet. But this game is the one to pay attention to, because even if we don't get to see this game, the result of this game is super interesting, especially if Rock win it. Obviously that's interesting because it's probably an upset based on Twisted Minds' previous success. And even if it's close, it's interesting because it sets the stage. Now, actually, if it's close already, and Rock are going to get more and more time, they're going to get loads of experience over these next few weeks between OWCS and playing in this tournament. Now, actually, if it's close in this game, Rock can maybe just overtake Twisted Minds. And if Rock overtake Twisted Minds, it's been such big domestic success for so long for Twisted Minds. Now, an upset at this point, it would be massive for them. And I think when I look at the imports and the improvements Rock have made, it's a really solid team. I think you have to look at this Rock Esports team, give them a lot of respect. I think TVNT and Rojo are really, really big up-and-comers. I think people maybe didn't watch Saudi E-League as much last year, but when they see these guys playing OWCS, I think they'll see the talent level on these two players in particular, especially alongside Checkmate and Iziaki. And I think it will really make people pay attention. And I think if any roster can either do in this tournament or any tournament soon to upset the Twisted Minds dynasty, it is this Rock Esports roster. So stay tuned for that. I'll try and bring more coverage as and when we get it. Obviously, if we can get access to the games, that would be ideal. But we'll bring you updates on the results. So if you enjoyed this sort of video, this tournament preview, we're going to be doing more of them for OWCS, for all the regions, power rankings of all the teams. So stay tuned for more content. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe and all that stuff. And I'll see you in the next one.